I am a software developer. I've been developing software for over 30 years. I'm currently a senior software engineer at Kelley Blue Book, or kbb.com. If you've used either the iPhone app, the Android app, the WinPhone 7 app, or our mobile website, you've used my stuff. I want to say one last thing about what Chara was saying about the marketing, and this is just from personal experience, because in addition to my 9-to-5 job at Kelley Blue Book, I also do a lot of side projects, and one of the places that I've found where people have money and they're willing to pay money, especially for simple apps, is marketing companies, such as companies that market for Coca-Cola and things like that. And it's a place where if you're a developer and you're thinking, hey, I kind of want to test the waters and see what's out there, you know, developing stuff on my own, they are somebody that has money, marketing companies, advertising companies, and they're looking for, you know, usually something that's a little weird, a little unique, especially if you're willing to like give it up, put some branding to it or whatever. So it's an avenue to go to. I will not give you any of my contacts because I'm keeping those to myself. But it's a way to make money, and not, you know, from some people that have money. In case you're thinking, hey, 99 cents at a time, and let me tell you, I can tell you from experience talking to other developers, going to different developers conferences, that people are cheap. People will pay $4, $5 for a cup of coffee and won't want to pay $1 for an app. It is very difficult, $1 at a time, and so you have to have some kind of an edge to get yourself in there. And one edge is to instead give the app away for free, but you get paid, you know, by a company that has money. So when Coca-Cola goes off and they bid for a job or whatever, to them paying you $50,000, $100,000 isn't anything. You know, they paid a couple of $1 million for a commercial in the Super Bowl. So, you know, the way more money than you would make $1 at a time you could make, but you have to get in. And so I would suggest that if you're thinking about doing side projects or eventually even going independent and doing something on your own, think about a little bit outside the box. Don't think about $1 at a time or working for another company. Think about hooking up with some marketing or advertising guys.
So if you take money from Coca-Cola, for example, do they own the app then? Or?
It all depends on how you have the contract worded. So like I did an app for a guy who's a, you know, a marketing guy, and it was really just a test app, but the idea of the app was just, we wanted to get something out there to start seeing what the market was like, and I still own the source code. Now I cannot use the graphics that we did on the project because he supplied the graphics, but the internal source code is still mine. And so if I wanted to, I could put new graphics on it and stick it out there in the App Store and charge for it. And you always want to try to negotiate so that you own the source code. If they want to supply you with imagery or whatever, that's fine. Let them supply that. That becomes their property, but the source code is yours. And if you're really smart, you market something very similar to somebody else. But it's a different way to think about it. It's a different way to go. And like I said, it's always nice to deal with people that have money, as opposed to trying to go to people that you know are reluctant to spend that $1. And the other thing I'm also going to say is that, for instance, I was talking at the Android Developers Conference to some people from Barnes & Noble. You don't think about the Nook as much of a device because it's a tablet and it's capable, but what they're saying is that developers on their platform actually make money as opposed to the majority of Android developers. And the reason is because their key market is women 30 to 50 who are used to spending money. And so if you give them, you know, they're used to buying books, actually buying the book, not just checking it out, and they like games like puzzle thinking kind of games. And they say that, but the other thing is Barnes & Noble is really picky about who they allow in. They usually only keep about 1,000 apps. And whichever ones are down at the bottom get kicked out, just like they will do a book. If a book doesn't sell, they put it on the discount bin and get rid of it as quickly as possible, and then they find somebody else to stick in there. So if you're really thinking about, you know, apps, try to go, and I would also, I have to give my friends at Microsoft a little shot. I would also think about WinPhone 7 platform. And the reason is that there are 500,000 apps in Android, 500,000 apps on iOS. There's really not much chance, if you just play the numbers, that your app is going to stand out. I don't care how good it is. It could be the greatest thing in the world. People could see it and just fall in love with it. And that would be great, but the odds are that it's going to never get recognized. However, Microsoft has money, and they are looking for people to develop apps. They gave me a phone for free, you know, and if, right now I'm in one of their contests, the winners of the contest are going to get free marketing from Microsoft because they only have like 30, I think they're up to 40,000 apps, maybe 50, and they want a lot more. So if you want to be a developer, try not to be, you know, religious about the platform you're on. Think about how can you get your name out there. And like I said, Microsoft right now is the one that's paying the most money. Think about, if you're an Android developer, think about going with one of the smaller platforms like Barnes & Noble, Amazon. Barnes & Noble would probably be my first choice of an Android app because they're a much smaller platform. And they will, unlike, you know, Google, which will let anything on their app store, Barnes & Noble is picky. So you better have come to them with something that is good for their customers. And that's enough marketing stuff out of me. This little session is just about JQuery Mobile. For those that don't know, first off, let me just give the things that we won't cover. I always like to say this because people always have expectations of what they're going to hear in a talk. And so right off the back, I'll say that I'm not going to talk about the server side. Everything that I'm doing, that I'm going to show you tonight, it's in ASP.NET MVC. However, if you are a Java developer, if you're a Ruby developer, if you're developing on an iOS platform, server software, web software on those platforms, you can make all this stuff that I'm going to show you run on those platforms because there's nothing Microsoft dependent on here. I'm not going to talk very much in depth about HTML5. I've only got like, you know, 50 minutes or something like that, so there's no way we're going to go into depth anyways. And as my favorite thing is, and most of the sessions that I do, my code usually runs naked in that there's no validation either on the client or on the server. And the idea is that this software will be made available to you if you want to download it and play around with it. You just want to get, I'm assuming most of the people in the room are developers, and I'm sure that you already know how to program, so I know that you know how to put something out that's, you know, production quality stuff. So rather than bore you with that, I'd rather just give you the meat, the nougat of what's going on here so that you can figure out how to get from where you are to get to here, as opposed to showing you lots and lots of details of how you do cross-model validation and you send stuff back to the server and then the server validates it there, because that gets really confusing and it makes it harder to learn the JQuery Mobile framework as opposed to learning about validation. But what we will cover is I'm going to give you a quick intro to JQuery Mobile. I'm going to talk about how it works and give you some of the details of how it works, because knowing these details makes it easier for you to get the platform to do the things that you want it to do, as opposed to just doing what some example says in a book. I'm going to talk about single-page applications. This is the power part of anything that you're going to do, especially in mobile, but it'll even improve the performance of your normal desktop app, in that instead of thinking about a web app as a series of pages, and you've got links, the person fills out a form, they click a submit button, then they go to this page, they do some other stuff, they click another thing, and they go here. Instead, I'm going to give you a glimpse into the world of like how Google does things in Gmail. You notice there's no jumping around from page to page. You stay on this one page, things keep coming and going, windows pop up, they go away. This is all based on the whole pattern of a single page application as opposed to an application that consists of a bunch of pages. I'm going to talk about how jQuery Mobile Framework does event handling. So on a phone or anything like that, you have different kinds of events that get triggered, both with the rendering of the page, with the how you do your navigation, your events for touching things, swiping things, when the phone rotates, things like that. I'm going to give you some tips, some things that I've learned, because we are currently, every month that I give a talk, I keep hoping that I'm going to say my software that, right now in KBB, we're doing a new version of our mobile website, which is using the jQuery Mobile Framework. And starting in December, I kept saying, hey, any day now I'll be able to say it's now released, it's 1.0, but it's still in beta, but I will, for those who are curious, I'll give you the link. It is open beta. So it may go down at any point as we're trying things out and we're deploying to the server, unlike a normal production server, but it is You can go and take a look and see what it is that I do 9 to 5. I'm also going to talk about the tools that I use. One of the things that you're always going to need when you do web software as opposed to desktop software is a good way to see what goes on. People that walked in might have seen me setting up Fiddler. I use Fiddler because I like to see what goes from the server to the client and back again. And there's other tools that I use as well. Finally, there will be a summary, and I'll have all the links that I've talked about for all the software that I'm using. So the big 50-foot view is that jQuery Mobile is a unified HTML-based user interface system for all popular mobile device platforms. Built on the rock-solid jQuery and jQuery UI foundation, it is lightweight code built with progressive enhancement and has a flexible, easy, themable design. The reality of what this is that it's a good framework for, you put stuff in here, just like, I don't know how many people here use jQuery. What jQuery does is it isolates web programs from the craziness of browsers. While the web may have a standard, very few people follow that standard to be exact. And sometimes, especially back in the old days, they did it for competitive reasons. They've added things, they've changed things. Sometimes the definition that W3C gives isn't very strict, so people have different interpretations, which works well if you're a user, but as a developer, it gets you. Like back in the days when you had to take a look at what the form was on a web page before jQuery, there's nothing in the specification from W3C that says here's how a form should be laid out as far as a programming analog. The problem was that everybody chose a different way to implement it. Some people did it as an array. Some people did it as a JavaScript object. And if you're trying to access that object and you think it's an array, only it's an actual object, a key value dictionary, what you're going to find is your program crashed or just stopped working and nobody knows why. jQuery allows you to isolate that. It takes all those little differences in browsers and puts them into a way so that you can always access the data in a correct fashion. And so there's two ways that you could do it. Either you could go out and test every single browser on the market, or you can let them do all that grunt work and you just use the fruits of their work. And I prefer to let somebody else do the grunt work. jQuery Mobile does the same thing for mobile-based browsers, because even on something, for instance, as Android, you would think, okay, pretty much every version of Android all has the same browser. No, it doesn't. Even though the browser is just named browser, it's all written by Google, the version numbers change. And so the version there's 2.1, 2.3, 2.3, 2.33, there's the 3 series, now there's 4.0, and each of those browsers is slightly different. So jQuery Mobile helps you to isolate those differences. It's also themable. By themable, it means that it gives you lots of different color sets and different patterns and things like that. And if you're a guy like me who, I am not a graphics person, and you need to turn up something, especially something like a line of business application, your business needs, your CEO has an iPhone and he wants, to be able to use, to see the data from the company on the web, on the road, and you need to turn something out, and you don't have a graphic artist to do all the really nice fancy CSS. Well, this gives you really nice appealing looking CSS without a lot of work, and it gives you like 5 different patterns that you could use, and you can intermix them on different pages. Plus, if you are talented or you just want some more zing and bling on your website, you can have an artist go through, follow the patterns that jQuery Mobile lays out, and come up with something that's unique to yourselves, and not have to do all the grunt work, just some of the grunt work. So enough said, let's take our first look at what this application is. And as I said, the app itself doesn't do a lot. It is just a demo. So the very first thing that we're going to talk about is the way that jQuery lays things out. In general, the screens are split up, any page is split up into 3 regions. There's a header, there's a content in the middle, and at the bottom, there's a footer. What goes in any of these regions is really up to you. But if you want to be standard, your header would be the title of the page and what the page does. The content, of course, can be whatever it is that you want to do as far as application design. And then the footer is, in this case, it's the navigation system for the application. All of this stuff, there's nothing magical going on here. If we take a look at the actual markup for this page, there is not a lot of magic going on here. So starting off with, we see a lot of div tags. Is everybody here web programmers, or for the most part, not at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so once again, I'll just remind everybody, this is an MVC application. It's split up so that there's a master page which contains all my header files, and then this is the actual the body part of that master page. So if we look here, we see that there is, in order to explain what we saw in the app, every jQuery mobile page is going to start off with a div that's given an attribute of data row equal page. That's all it is. It's just a div tag. So all the other magic, all the markup, all the classes, you notice that there's not a lot of classes in use in here. jQuery Mobile prefers to do almost everything through attributes. In HTML5, prior to HTML5, we used to use a thing called pseudo attributes. And sometimes if you've ever taken a look at somebody else's page and figure out how they do stuff, you'll see attributes that don't make any sense. And that's just generally based on the fact that a browser is told that anytime you see something that you do not recognize, ignore it. So we could put attributes, create pseudo attributes to hold data about that element. Well, HTML5 recognized that fact that lots and lots of developers and lots of web pages were built using attributes that are not standard. So rather than have people continue to just do whatever they want, they came up with a standard for that. And the standard is that you say data dash, and then whatever it is that you want, that becomes an attribute of your own. It is not part of W3C, it is your own company's meaning. And in the case of jQuery Mobile, you will see everything that it does, all of its magic is done in these pseudo attributes. And so the very first one being role equals page. The role can also be things like a dialog for a dialog box. It can be header for the header tag that was sitting on the top page. You can put just about anything you want in here. So there's a mix right now on this page of jQuery Mobile's attributes and my own. So my own is this guy right here. The standard should be that they say the suggested standard or pattern to use is that for your own stuff, you should give it data dash something that individually recognizes your organization. So in this case, it's my own little company's name. And then the last part of it is what this thing is. And in this case, it's something that I call a JS page. And that JS page is a mechanism I use that ties JavaScript to markup. And so I know that when this page is rendered, here's the JavaScript that's tied to it. And I'll show you that in just a minute. So far, so clear? All right. So as we go down the markup, and part of what I like about, we at Kelley Blue Book, we actually went through a bunch of different frameworks for doing mobile applications at the time. One of the ones that we also looked at was Sencha. Sencha is a very powerful framework. They have a lot of really good stuff in it. The problem was I did not want to become an expert of Sencha because I've gone down that path before in my career of choosing someone's framework, and it's well and great until they change their business model, or you find out that no one has a job doing that, or the company that you work for suddenly goes a different direction, and all you know is this. I prefer to stick with open standards. However, if you're investigating, doing a mobile application, you might want to take a look at Sencha. Like I said, it does do a lot of powerful stuff. It is way more mature than jQuery Mobile. jQuery Mobile just went 1.0 in November. It just went 1.01 in January. but it's still in active development. But the other thing that I like about jQuery Mobile is you get all the source code. You don't like something and you really, really want to change it, you can either change it and keep that change private, you can change it and then submit that change to the group and hopefully get it accepted into the framework itself, you know, but it's always nice to have source code. Because I don't care how much somebody promises you in any sort of kit that they give you, and they do all sorts of obfuscation to hide their code and keep the secret of what they did and how they did it. And the other thing is, and this is something I highly recommend if you're a front-end developer, take a look at the code of jQuery Mobile. Because in just, you know, in a relatively small amount of code, they do a lot of really interesting and neat things that might be relevant to your own coding. And it's nice to always see how they did stuff, that it's not magic, it isn't something that's beyond you. We're a room full of smart people, and it's nice to know the tricks, because you'll look at it and you'll go, that's kind of interesting. It might solve the problem I'm having with this. Let me try that same pattern. Okay, so as we continue our little journey into what the code does, we get the content. Content can be anything. This is just straight web stuff. And this is, again, the reason why I like this framework so much is because if you know how to program the web, within just a couple of hours, you can be programming the mobile web. And this makes it a really powerful way, for instance, because it's so easy to get something up and just get a quick look at something and do something. We use a lot of this stuff for prototyping. You know, we don't get all the fluidness of the things that we're doing, but we'll do a lot of it and we'll prototype it before, you know, we put it in hardcore development. And especially right now, what we're even thinking of doing is, as I said, we maintain 3 different device applications, and it's a lot of work maintaining those. Because one is written in Objective-C, the other one is in Java, and the third one's in C#. Which means that we can't share any source code, which means if we find a problem, we have to fix it not just on 3 different platforms, but in 3 different languages. Which then means that we have to go back and then test it through all of those stuff and run it through our whole test suite, which for Android right now, we're testing on in-house on 20 devices. We're testing it on iPhone 3G, 4, 4S, running both 5.0 and 4.0. So it's a lot of testing that you have to do. And one of the things that we're thinking of doing is using PhoneGap and then taking our new version of our website and then just doing versions across all the different platforms using that instead. We're still in the evaluation stage because we got to get this baby born. Because everybody's, it's always interesting how long it takes. Because if you had bet me money back in November, I would have said we'd be done in December before Christmas. I would have lost that bet by quite a margin, and still to be determined margin, because yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just rambling.
So when you're saying you're testing on multiple like devices, like even multiple iOS, like I understand like for native apps it really matters, but it also, I guess you're saying it matters for web apps and Safari on different iPhone builds.
Yes.
Significantly different.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things, for instance, our normal problem with iPhone isn't so much the rendering, it's the speed of the rendering. Because on each version of the iPhone as it's come up, both the processors have gotten faster and the JavaScript engine has gotten faster. Our application does a lot of little tricks, so we have lots of smooth panning, both horizontally and vertically, and so we're watching to see how those are actually implemented on the device, because we want things to be as smooth as we can. And then the other thing that we've noticed is that there's slight changes in the CSS and how it's rendered. And we found a couple of little places where, you know, something was not rendered correctly on one of the older phones, and apparently it was a bug that they fixed in the newer OSs.
Actually, yeah, it makes sense, because like I have iOS 3, and I'm not even on 4 or 5 yet.
Right.
On my iPhone for various reasons, and like just recently, the last 2 weeks ago, the LinkedIn doesn't work for me anymore. I guess they updated their mobile web application.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, if you, depending on whether you're doing this in a corporate setting or doing this on your own, I always recommend, if you're doing it on your own, hey, you say you want to build this website and you want to get it up and running, That's the point where you start noticing each one of your friends' phones and writing down his number and his contact information, because you want as many people to take a bang at it. Because one of the things, like the bug that I fixed last week, Samsung Galaxy S2, one running on Verizon, one running on AT&T. You would think that they would be pretty much the same. Samsung's a smart company. The Galaxy S2 is a very smart, very fast phone. One of them had a bug, one of them didn't. Exact same code. And fixing it becomes the problematic part. And the reason is because you have to fix it for one phone and not break any of the others. Don't get me wrong, usually where you get yourself into trouble is when you get too fancy, like we have. We're trying to make the user experience as pleasant as possible. If you're just doing straight up web development, you won't run into stuff, but we're using a lot. I don't know if people are familiar with an open source package called iScroll. iScroll, what it does is it allows you to do very smooth swiping of things in both directions, and you have to have your markup done exactly right when you do these kinds of things. You have to think about, and you have to think not in a fixed manner, but in a floating way, because all the phones have different dimensions to them. And so this is the thing that gives us the biggest challenge, is that every now and then I catch one of my engineers cheating. They'll go, oh yeah, I got it working, see, and they show me the iPhone. See, look, everything's perfect. Then we put it on one of the other phones, and especially like the Droids, because the Droids usually have higher resolution. They'll go like 500, 900, and so we'll put it on there, and everything looks all jacked up. And I take a look at their code, and instead of saying like percentages, they said something like, oh, 416. What's so magic about the number 416? It's the area that you have on an iPhone to actually put stuff on a web page. And that's why they put that number in there. You can't do that when you're trying to support all the phones. So either way, we go through, and one of the things everybody should be familiar with as they look at this markup is that there's really, other than seeing a few attributes that you don't recognize, there's nothing fancy going on here. Those buttons at the bottom of the page are just A tags. That's what I like, is that you know this already. There's not a lot of transition. And in fact, for most line of business applications, for most applications that are not super performant, I would more recommend that you do this as a web type application. And then if necessary, if you really want to have it, in the App Store or in the market, the Android market, use PhoneGap. And the reason is because you will cut like probably a good 50% or more off your development time, because the web is an easy to understand entity, whereas when you get really device specific, I spent a week one time trying to figure out on Android how to change the color of the tabs. It's a crazy thing. I totally know how to do it on the web. I know how to create something that looks like a tab, and I can change the color of it at will. Only there was no way to do it, and it took me a week to figure it out. And I know I'm not the only one that had that problem, because I wrote a blog about it, and it's the blog of the post of my blog that gets the most hits, because everybody else has figured out that why can't you do this easily? And these are the kind of things that you run into when you do device-specific development. If you've got a game, or if you've got something else that needs to be really, really, as performant as it can be, by all means, write it to the device. But think about, hey, doing your prototype first as a web app, because you will get up and running a lot quicker. So let's continue on. As I said before, the data-techadev.js page, that's the code, that's the little attribute that ties my markup to my JavaScript. And what that means is basically when this page gets rendered, I want things to happen. And this is going to go ahead and go to kind of like the next little stage of this demonstration, which is my application. This piece of code gets loaded, and it's sort of like the core that sits below all the different pages that get drawn. In this application right now, there's just 3 pages. And this core right here, what it is it's my kernel, it's my dispatcher, it's the magic that ties all the markup to JavaScript so that I know what state my application is at any given point. What you're seeing here, this guy here is the dispatcher, or excuse me, the kernel. This guy here, this is JQuery code that does event binding. I could do this in straight JavaScript. The problem is I would have to do it slightly different depending on what browser was running, and I would have to do some property sniffing, and the code would probably be like 3 times bigger. Plus it would be a little bit harder on JavaScript side simply because this uses a thing called live. And what live does is it says even when new markup gets added, keep these events live, and if they are relevant to the new markup, apply this event to them too. Normally when you do event binding in JavaScript, you can't do that easily. You have to, every time you do a lot of dynamic DOM manipulation, you have to also add new markup or new JavaScript to keep those events live on those new things that you put up on there. But live in jQuery handles that for me. And why this is important is that almost always in jQuery Mobile, it's going to do some fancy manipulations of your markup. By that I mean, if we go and we do navigation from one page to the next, it does that sliding effect, and the way that it's doing that is it's dynamically changing the markup as time is going on. Likewise, if we go to the next page, you see that it does another transition. And that's all done dynamically, and it's always moving stuff in and out of the DOM. And does everybody know what the DOM is? So the document object model in HTML, you get the markup, and that's kind of like for human eyes. But when it gets read into your browser, it gets split up and it gets put into a binary tree-like structure called the DOM. And so it can find little chunks of HTML. And then that thing gets blasted out to the actual web page so that it gets rendered. And you always want to be aware of that the DOM is not stable. Just because the page got loaded in like this doesn't mean it's going to stay like this. And plus, even in your own code, you're going to do stuff dynamically to change and modify things. So for instance, this application, in case you're curious, it's an application I would never write in real life, but it makes a decent demo. It's a contact manager web page or web pages. So you can add a contact here. I can see my list of contacts here. This list right here is actually rendered on the device. It is not sent down as part of the markup, and as new names are added, this list gets changed and whatever. But at some point, if I ever fully finish this application, you'll be able to edit them and delete them. But the idea being that the DOM doesn't stay the same. As you add these lists, the markup gets changed, and the jQuery Mobile needs to be aware of it. And if you have event handlers tied to list or whatever, you would need to be aware of these things too. Okay, so that was our first demo. So we talked about your basic page structure with header, content, and footer. And be aware that just because they're suggested doesn't mean that they're required. So for instance, I work for Kelley Blue Book. We show lots of cars. It's really nice to have the header and footer on some pages, but other pages we want that real estate in order to show an image, for instance, of a car. We want it to have the whole page. So you can get rid of any of these things. That's what's great about the framework, is it doesn't require it. It just suggests things and makes it easy for you to do them without requiring them for you, requiring you to have them. Inside the header, you can have both text, which is your basic header. You can put buttons in there, and jQuery Mobile has support for a back button inside the header, and this gets important because some phones don't have depending on how you do things or how you want to do things. Some phones, for instance, most of the Androids have inside the header, or not the header, of the phone, the back is built in. Same thing for Windows Phone Mobile. It is not necessarily going to always be there on iPhone. Usually at the bottom you have the forward and back. And if you want to claim that real estate back, you can get rid of those. But you can put the header back button in there so that it'll do a history.back for you anytime it's pressed. And that's actually part of the framework, and it can be turned on fairly easy. In the footers, you can have buttons as well, and the nav bar. And the nav bar was the structure that I showed you inside the markup that had all the A tags in there. Oops. So this is the navigation bar. JQuery Mobile will do certain things as a standard. So if you say, hey, this is a footer, and you put something in there called data row equal nav bar, you will get that nav bar like behavior. You can also put buttons down there if you prefer, and pretty much any other markup that you want it in there. But the idea is that just by putting that data row equals nav bar in there, it will go ahead and do the attributes on everything so that when it gets rendered, it puts everything in, it dynamically decides on the sizing of things so that it fills out the bottom row. And if we, for instance, take a look, I'm going to try this because I don't know how big this tablet looks big from a distance. So it changes the size of these things dynamically so that even as I go from page to page, you see that this guy is like this, but if I go ahead and rotate this tablet to this way, you can see that it changes again and it spans everything out. And it does that just like it would for like a table or whatever, and it's just done using classes. And these classes get dynamically added to the markup after jQuery has done its rendering. And that is probably one of those things that tends to get people into trouble with jQuery Mobile, is because they assume that things are instantaneous, but they're really not. And so if we take a look at this same markup as it actually gets rendered, I know this is a little bit small, I apologize, but I can't scale Fiddler's screen size. This is one of the tools that I use, and it allows me to take a look at the markup. So you can see suddenly there's classes. I didn't have any classes in my markup. All those classes were rendered by jQuery Mobile. Once it got the page into memory, it went through the DOM and changed everything to the things that it believes that we want. A lot of that is done based upon what's inside a data role. So in things that are called data role equals navigation. So this is our contacts page. Here's our footer of our contacts page. And if we expand this guy, we see the data role equals nav bar. We see our UIs and LIs. And each of those got some classes and stuff marked up to it. And all those classes didn't exist initially. They were put there by jQuery Mobile. Now, this is what I mean when I say that it gets people into trouble, is that takes time. On a mobile, on Chrome running on your quad-core i7 at 3 gigahertz, it may not seem like it took time, but even the fastest phone is slower than the slowest desktop usually, unless you're still using something from 1999. So you always want to be cognizant of how much markup you have in there and when you're loading stuff in, because every time it loads in a new page, jQuery Mobile is going to do some rendering of it. And one of the things that's really important, especially in a mobile environment, is the perception of speed is more important than the actual implementation of speed. By that I mean that the very first thing that you want to show the user is show them something quickly. If you load in 10 pages worth of stuff and it takes 5 seconds for the phone to render all that HTML markup, people are going to think that they have a bad connection, that your app has hung. And remember, as the president of my company likes to say, people are always just one click from your competitor. So if your page rendering is taking too long, you need to change things around. So usually what I do is I make one page. That one page, I optimize it so that it comes up as quickly as possible. It has the minimum amount of JavaScript that it needs to just get into memory and get rendered into the display. Then what it does as an asynchronous task is start loading in the other pages. And what that'll give is, like, for instance, if your main page is a menu or something like that, it will give people that impression that, hey, this thing came up, it came up really quick, it's responding to me, it's doing what it needs to do, and it's doing so quickly. You don't want to give people the impression that your site has hung, because they will go back and go to the next choice in Google search. And then as an example of that, let's show some fun. A much better example of code. Oh. Well, that's interesting. My site is down again. I do believe the last time I was here, it was down. Although they could be doing deployment right now, because it's Thursday night, but they should have been done already. Yep, they are down. That was a good demo.
Timing is
It would have
everything.
been, yeah. Well, usually they're done with their deployments by 5 o'clock because people like to
I'm
go
hitting
home.
back on my browser right now.
Huh?
I'm hitting back on the back button.
I know, that's exactly what would happen in real life. Luckily for us, I mean, it says even in the name, it's beta. So either way, let's continue on with our wonderful discussion here. So we talked about content, now let's get to the events and let's kind of bring this to a close. So JQuery Mobile has a bunch of different events that you can tap into. You have virtual mouse events. These are it's basically using your finger as though it was a mouse, and it'll give you like mouse down, mouse press, mouse up, all that stuff like that. And quite honestly, I don't use those. I don't use them because I don't really care. I don't want to actually pretend to be a mouse because I find that a little bit limiting. And so I'm not really going to talk very much about that. You also have scroll events as things get scrolled onto and off the screen. We really haven't had a need yet to use those. It's something that we've looked into, but we haven't figured out a way to make it do anything for us. Then, of course, there are touch events. So in the case of touch events, of course you have the tap, and that works just like a click. And then the other one that you have is the swipes. Now let's see if I can get this to work right. Because unfortunately, swiping is one of those things that you can't demo by pretty much any other means.
Good so far.
Just hang in there. So, as we've seen before, we have the navigation at the bottom, and now I can use my finger to swipe from page to page. This is one of those things that, for some users, and especially if you have an app that performs very well, it supports the phone the way that users are used to using a phone. In our application, one of the things that we found was people got so into the swiping and the moving of stuff, and a couple times we had to explain that you could swipe at places, that they forgot that it was a website. They thought it was an app, that it was an actual app, which is good, which is exactly the behavior that we wanted. We don't want people thinking that this is just another website that you tap, fill things out. No, this is more of the kind of experience that phone users are expecting. So that's swiping. You get swipe left and swipe right. There's no swipe up or down though. Not in jQuery Mobile. We use, like I said, iScroll, and iScroll has the up and down motions, and we use those a lot for panning data around. It works really good when you have a list that's not too long, maybe a dozen items or so, and they're represented graphically. And in our case, we use them for selecting cars, for selecting a make of a car, for going through all the different pictures on a car, and those are the touch events. Also, in case you were paying attention, and I can't show this with this thing plugged in because the tablet itself, whenever it has the monitor plugged in, it doesn't let you do a portrait mode. It only supports landscape mode. And then you can't see that it's bringing up a alert box saying what the orientation is, and this is showing orientation change events. So usually the recommendation that I give people is when you do stuff with orientation, what you want to think about is how to make the best use of the screen when you're in different orientations. So if you're in a normal land or portrait mode, you think more like a phone. But when somebody goes in landscape mode, you should think, okay, how can I use some of that extra screen real estate? You might want to bring up a separate div layer that shows some other data that you normally can't fit because it would be too narrow in a portrait mode. So those are touch events, and then there are page events. If anybody is a Microsoft programmer or even Java, where you've done desktop development, you go through a different set of page, in fact, even Android and iOS, you go through different events as pages get rendered. And in the case of JQuery Mobile, we go through a bunch of events, each as the page gets rendered onto the screen. And what these do is they give you a chance to do some work at different points. Now here are all the events that are possible, and I'm not necessarily using all of them.
Right.
Screen.
Screen.
Oh, sorry. But if I show you what the screen looks like, it would be really good.
Or at least more visible. Oops. There it is.
Yeah, it just has to take a second to think about what I hooked up to it.
Small brain.
So in this case, here are the events, and here are the events in the order that they get fired. So there's a page before create, a page create. And what that means is page before create gets fired before JQuery Mobile goes through and starts manipulating the DOM. So you can actually tell it not to. You can add more markup so that that markup gets modified before the page gets created. Then there's a page init. Page init is very similar to if you use jQuery or if you use JavaScript in just plain straight JavaScript and you're used to the onload event or the jQuery document ready event, that's what page init does. It gives you a chance to do something once everything is ready and you want to do something. You want to know when is it a safe time to do stuff. Because in JavaScript, if you don't get timing of things right, you will have weird behaviors. And these are nasty little bugs to find because what will happen is things will happen differently on different devices. And I found that, a couple times, because I have a couple of junior programmers that I work with a lot, and this is something that they do a lot. They put things in the wrong timing sequence, and then what will happen is they're doing something on an iPhone 5. Hey, or iOS 5, and this is a iPhone 4S, and it works perfectly every time. And then I try it on this Nexus 1 that's like 2 years old, so ancient in internet terms, and it doesn't behave correctly. And the reason is that they put it in before the JavaScript and jQuery Mobile was ready for it. On one phone that's really, really fast, the rendering happened fast enough that they were able to get away with it. I mean, the other one, they got caught. And you want to avoid these kind of bugs because they're very difficult to find, because you'll get stuck in this pattern of, hey, I don't understand why it works sometimes and not others. Then you get the page before load, page before show. Before show happens just before it's getting ready to do the final rendering. This is usually the place where I hook my events. Then there's page show, which means that the document the DOM has been shown to the screen. There's a change and a page change. And these two events I don't really use a lot. But the hide event and page before hide and page hide, for the most part, I kind of use them as analogs to each other. They actually are slightly different. but I use them for a place to do cleanup. So you get a shot, like, I always believe that anytime you hook an event, later on, at some point, you should balance that off with unhooking it, because these will cause memory leaks if you don't unhook them properly. Or if you keep hooking an event and hooking it, what you'll do is you'll get performance degradation over time. Because there will actually be, you know, like if the user keeps going to this one page and he's done so 50 times, there'll be 50 events hooked to that one thing if you're not balancing off your hooking and unhooking of events. And what actually starts to happen is people will go, well, I've been, you know, just sort of playing with your app for 10 minutes, you know, during my lunch, and notice it's running really slow now. And once again, those are really hard to find, because it's usually, as a developer, you spend like a minute or two working on a feature. You don't spend 15 minutes playing around with your app, usually, unless your app is a really cool game or something. So these are the events, and what will happen is, as jQuery transitions from page 1 to page 2, you'll actually get events on both the pages as it kind of ping-pongs back and forth. So the very first thing it'll do is, as it gets ready to show page 2 and you're on page 1, you'll get the, you know, a before show on page 2, and then you'll get a before hide on page 1, and it'll ping-pong back and forth. And like I said, it gives you a chance to clean things up, follow through those cycles. So these are the events. And like I said, the events are also really good because it gives you a framework into, here's how you develop this application. It's really good so that if somebody comes along and says, well, you know, I need to, you know, marketing wants to put this feature into the app. I'm not sure what to do. Because I have a page, every page has its own separate JavaScript, you know how to get started. You know that if this page is supposed to do this, well, you give it a name that, if it's called, you know, print, you give it a name that has print in it, you create a bunch of events, the events that you're using, you keep, and then you know that, you know, in certain steps during the line, you need to do certain things. The user clicks the print button, you need to open up a connection and send that printed document somewhere. And by doing things in this sort of a fashion, because JavaScript, the reason why it is such a harsh mistress is because it's usually written by undisciplined developers. And you can do everything any way that you want, and everybody does. And I especially suggest if you're working in a team, or even if you're just working by yourself, because most of this stuff I actually did before I joined Kelley Blue Book in this sort of a fashion, because I'm lazy and I don't like to do things twice. So I always try to make it so that I remember what I was doing the last time I was doing something, and it makes it really easy because I keep my code as clean as I possibly can. Okay, so we talked about how the markup gets modified, both in how it looks when it's in Visual Studios before it gets modified, what it looks like inside of, and by the way, the browser I'm using is usually Chrome, and sometimes I use Safari, and how it gets modified. So we talked about the pseudo attributes, annotating the markup takes time. Widgets and buttons, you've seen some of the buttons on the add thing. I won't go too much further into depth on those, because basically they're just HTML, normal HTML, and what jQuery is going to do is decorate them and make them look pretty. In case you didn't catch it, the app itself on the buttons, there was a submit button that said save. It looked nice and pretty and blue, and it was an oval shape, and that's what this thing does. Now this app here, as far as single page marked applications, all three of those pages are actually in resident at a time. I don't know if you paid attention or not, but when I went from page to page, there was no fetch to the server. This is critical in mobile. You want to make it so that once you have a connection, past that first download you want it to be as quickly as possible. After that, you want to grab as much data as you can in one shot, and then try not to do anything else unless you have a reason to. Like if the user submits something, yes, you want to open up and do a post back to the server. But you don't want to do a lot of fetching back and forth, because I don't care what the phone carriers say about how fast LTE is, it takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
perception-wise, to open up a connection, even to send a byte. And the reason is because there's if you think about how cell phones work, it's amazing that they work at all, let alone that they're, not quite as fast as you want. But once they're open and you have that connection, and, assuming that you're like, on a 4G network or even a 3G network, then it's faster. But getting that first connection, it's like, trying to do a seek on a tape drive. That first seeking of the data, it takes a long time, and you don't want people to be sitting there going, I think it died. I'm pretty sure it died. I should just go ahead and hit that back button and go to somebody else's site. So we did our app as a single page thing. Now the last thing that I'll talk about is pretty much is performance tips is in JQuery and JQuery Mobile, we use this thing called selectors. And let me show you what a selector looks like. This guy here is a selector. So everything from the inside the quote marks of those parentheses is a selector. Selectors are method calls. You're calling into a method. That method is scanning the DOM and it's looking for the things that you told it to look for. Anytime you do these, I would almost never do a straight selector call like this in a real production application, and the reason is because it takes a lot of time. Once you have the selector, however, you can cache it into a variable and then use that variable, which will be pointing back to the same spot. And the difference is like night and day. I'm the nerd that's in charge of speed. When people have problems with things that involve that things are running really slow, I go through and tell them what they did wrong. Now, luckily, my team is really smart, and when this does happen, I also learn a lot of good stuff from them too. But as far as speed, this is what I used to do. I used to write video games way back when. I used to work for a company called Interplay. I also wrote avionics systems when I did DoD work, and now I'm doing car valuation. I'm not sure how that happened. But one of the things I'll tell you is that you always want to make sure if you're doing something that involving selectors, that you cache them. The second thing is that you want to narrow your selectors. And what that means is if you have a div and this div encloses all of the information that you want the selector to find, you want to make sure you include especially the ID for that div in the selector. And the reason is that it won't look all over the DOM. Instead, it'll stay within the regions of that div, looking for whatever it is that you told it. And the difference, once again, is night and day. It's a lot faster. The other thing is JQuery Mobile has a thing called the active page, which is $.mobile.activePage. At any given time, because I have 3 pages in memory, and in fact on my app in Kelly Blue Book, at different points I have 13 pages in memory at a time. If you do a reference to the active page, it won't search all of those pages. It'll only search the one that's the currently active page. And then the final thing as far as performance tips is, you might have noticed it in the markup, is to use data DOM cache. And what data DOM cache does is this. If you have a site and you're pushing things, retrieving other pages from the website, from your server as you're going along, data DOM cache says, once I grab a page, hold on to it. Don't let that page go. So that if later on the user navigates to that page again, instead of it having to do a server call, it's already kept in memory. And that makes your app faster as the user gets to pages, and they don't get that extra penalty of, oh, I navigated back to this page and then there was another call to the server. Instead, it's an instant. It says, oh, hey, I've got this page already. Even though it wasn't strictly necessary on the pages in this app, since it loads everything at one time, I always just get into the habit, until I have a reason not to, of using data DOM cache. Because, like I said, if you make a normal website and you divide your website into different sections and you load in different sections, you can make it more performant by using data DOM cache. My personal tools that I use, I prefer a WebKit-based browser, and it's because they all include a built-in debugger. Firebug is cool and all. I don't have a problem with Firebug, but it's a separate part from Firefox. Whereas I don't have to remember to update the debug kit with Chrome or Safari. And in case you didn't realize it, they're both WebKit browsers, which means they're built on the same platform. So I don't have to remember to do any updates. And plus, as an added benefit, because both Apple and Google's engineers use their own dog food or eat their own dog food, the tools get better each, like literally every few weeks. I'll notice that in the next version, the latest version of Safari or Chrome, they've improved the tool again. That it does one thing a little bit better than it did before. And it's because their own developers use it. So I would rather go with that than some guy who's working at home, who's done really, really cool stuff. And in fact, the guy that used to work for that developed Firebug works for Google now. Wiener is one of those things that I wish I could really demonstrate to you. It is a debugger for phone apps. What it does is it allows you to, you put a piece of code, a JavaScript file in your program, and then you can talk and you can see what's going on inside the phone. Now it calls itself a debugger, but it really isn't. It's close, but it's not a full debugger. It allows you to see the DOM, to manipulate objects, to see what to do. Like if you have things set to the window object, you can see what their values are, but it doesn't allow you to set breakpoints. But because a lot of the problems that you'll have, especially as you go to multiple phones, are something isn't rendering correctly. You can at least see what the DOM looks like and get all the measurements of different objects and figure out what you did wrong. And nothing beats a real device for that, because even on things, the Apple simulator, iPhone simulator is good, but it's not perfect. Fiddler 2 you've seen, and I think most people are aware of it. It's just a tool that allows you to see as web requests go back and forth between the server and the client if they're on the same machine, or if you set up you can actually set it up so your device goes through it too. And there's actually information about that on Fiddler's website. ReSharper is kind of like IntelliSense on steroids if you're a Microsoft platform user. It basically gives you the ability to see all of the open source JavaScript files that you're tied into, to get IntelliSense on them as well. And this is really handy because JavaScript doesn't compile. So if you've got the wrong parameter in a method call, you're not going to get an error. Your program just won't work. So you can get to see IntelliSense on those kinds of things even before you do stuff. And I mean, ReSharper is probably the best $100 I've ever spent of my own money. JSLint is mandatory for anybody doing JavaScript. It is written by, it's a website, jslint.com. You put your JavaScript in there and it'll tell you all the little things that you did wrong.
Nice.
And as the quote of the website says, JSLint will make you cry. And it will tell you some things, but the honest to goodness truth, if you follow all their recommendations, I mean, Yahoo, is not quite the glorious outfit that it used to be, but they created a lot of really smart tools for doing web development. And I would highly listen to their recommendations, because by nipping small problems in the bud, during development, you saved yourself from really nasty bugs later on. So as I've said, summary simple. JQuery Mobile is an easy-to-use framework for mobile web development. You already know how to use it. That's the biggest selling point. If you are a web developer, you know how to use this tool. And here are all the links to all the different things. This code, I will post it probably tomorrow morning up on my website. I don't want to do it over 3G speeds, no matter how fast they say that it is. So all the demo code, all the slides will be posted. If you go to my blog, which is listed at the bottom, the Rock Encoder at blogspot.com, you will be able to get all this and download it. And that's it.